I am monarch of all I survey. My right there is none to dispute. From the center all around to the sea, I am the lord of the fowl and the brute. Welcome back to my island show. This time we're going back to the age of exploration and the realm of people trapped on isolated islands. Though specifically it is about one person this time, and he chose to get trapped on this island. If that sounds strange to you, let me explain as I tell you about the history and geography of Robinson Crusoe Island. Robinson Crusoe Island is an island in the southern Pacific Ocean, about 700 kilometers off the coast of Chile, to which it belongs. The island has an irregular form, somewhat in the shape of a triangle, and from end to end it is about 16 kilometers across and has a population of about 800, almost all of whom live in the town San Juan Bautista. The town is on the eastern end of the island, as this is where the only suitable harbor can be found, as well as this being the more habitable part of the island. The western end is considerably more rocky and barren. Originally established as a Spanish fort and later a penal colony, housing some 300 Chilean revolutionaries during the Chilean War of Independence, it would eventually be turned into the town we see today by, of all people, a Swiss entrepreneur named Alfred von Roth, who kickstarted the local fishing industry. The town boasts few services, but one notable oddity is that the harbor is home to a World War I shipwreck, the SMS Dresden. The Dresden was a light cruiser which had narrowly escaped destruction at the Battle of the Falklands of 1914, fleeing to Robinson Crusoe Island for safety as Chile was neutral in the war. The Dresden signaled to the presumed British that it was no longer a combatant and under protection of neutral waters. When HMS Kent and HMS Glasgow cornered Dresden in the harbor of San Juan Bautista, they didn't really care and proceeded to bombard the defenseless ship. Because negotiation had failed, the captain of the Dresden purposely scuttled the ship to avoid it falling into British hands. The wreck that remains symbolizes the history of the island quite well, as the SMS Dresden was not the first to seek refuge on the island, and not nearly the most interesting thing that happened there. A narrow peninsula holds the island's only airstrip, across from which is the small uninhabited island Santa Clara. Robinson Crusoe Island has been formed through volcanic activity due to it being in the Juan Fernández hotspot, the highest point being at 915 meters above sea level. The island is heavily eroded, resulting in very steep and jagged mountains. The island is occasionally subject to strong winds that last only for a few minutes, which rush through the many valleys with pretty great violence. The island is home to a Mediterranean climate and a small number of endemic birds, including the Juan Fernández firecrown, the Juan Fernández tit tyrant, Masafuera rayadito, and also, not a bird, the Juan Fernández fur seal, which would be hunted near extinction. The first recorded time anyone ever set foot on the island was in 1574 by, Juan Fernández. Juan was a Spanish explorer who came upon the island group, naming them after himself. The island we are focused on, he named Mas a Tierra, meaning closer to land, as opposed to the other major island of the three, named Mas Afuera, meaning further from land. Neither of these two names, however, are what the islands are currently called in the modern day, for reasons I will explain later. It is likely that no one had ever visited this place before Juan. No evidence exists to support a visit by Polynesians or Native Americans, although not entirely impossible. Not a whole lot is written about the island in these early days. It probably wasn't visited very often, as there wasn't really all too much of interest to be found there. What really set the island apart is what happened there, and to tell this story I have to introduce a Scottish buccaneer by the name of Alexander Selkirk. Alexander was a Scottish privateer and navy officer in the year 1703. During the War of Spanish Succession, Alexander joined an expedition to the southern Pacific Ocean led by English explorer William Dampier. Alexander, an impulsive and quarrelsome man, had gotten into some trouble back at home and saw the expedition as a good way to escape his problems. Alexander served as the sailing master of the secondary expedition ship, the Cinque Ports, while William captained the St. George. On paper, an exploration venture, their unofficial objective was to raid Spanish ships and settlements. The expedition would round Cape Horn and get into a number of unfavorable engagements. They would get a break, however, and win a major victory against a Spanish merchant vessel, after which the Cinque Ports parted ways with the St. George due to disagreements between their two captains. While sailing along the coast of Chile, it soon became evident that their ship was in a poor state, and for this reason, its captain, named Thomas Stradling, decided to find a spot to make repairs. As they could not make their repairs in Chile due to being British privateers, they went to the isolated Masa Tierra, where there would be no eyes on them. Underneath the sharp mountains of Masa Tierra, Alexander, perhaps due to his impulsivity, began a heated argument with the captain. Alexander strongly believed the ship not to be seaworthy, and that they would eventually sink. He also blamed Thomas for the terrible conditions on the ship, as morale was low and many were suffering from scurvy. Alexander was so adamant that he told the captain he would rather stay on the island than leave with this ship. Thomas called him on his bluff and ordered for his items, including a musket, a hatchet, a Bible, clothing, and bedding, among some other personal items, to be brought ashore. Alexander, through his own decision, would be marooned on Masa Tierra in October of 1704. Alexander in his rashness thought others would follow his example, but eventually he would be standing on the beach alone as the Cinque Ports sailed past the horizon. Alexander immediately regretted his decision, stating it to be the most miserable moment of his life. Though he didn't know it at the time, staying behind may have saved his life, as the Cinque Ports would end up sinking off the coast of Colombia, with most of the crew perishing. Those that survived would be captured and imprisoned. Alexander, having escaped this fate, remained on the beach, as the interior of the island was too jagged and steep, and therefore mostly inaccessible. The island was not bare at all of resources, as it was heavily wooded on the eastern half, where Alexander found himself. There were many streams running down from the mountains which could provide Alexander with fresh water. These facts wouldn't concern Alexander at first, as he was under such great dejection of mind that he wouldn't taste food until urged by extreme hunger. He would only sleep when he could no longer watch. His eyes were fixed in the direction that his shipmates had departed, hoping to see them return and come to save him. When hunger became too severe, he would begin scavenging the beach for shellfish. Masa Tierra is home to many species of shellfish, the most important being the spiny lobster, which currently serves as the cornerstone of the island's economy. When Alexander had arrived on the island, spring was in full swing. Spring on Masa Tierra is fairly unique in its form. Many colors and fragrances appear all over the island, an observation that went completely over Alexander's head as he continued to ponder his decision, agitated to the point that he regarded none of the island's charms. Alexander would spend his days scavenging the beach, finding enough food to get by, and reading his Bible. In the beginning, he would often lie awake at night, as he had trouble falling asleep due to the incessant barking of seals during their mating season. During the day, Alexander would occasionally hear rumbles originating from the center of the island, which contributed to a fear of leaving the beach. Alexander's first real objective was the building of a hut. To gather resources, he would have to head inland. This scared Alexander, and he would have to compose himself before venturing even a little from the beach. He made 2 huts, possibly made from the wood of the Peruvian pepper tree, that was plentiful on the island. Another common tree on the island is the endemic Juan Fernández cabbage tree, the leaves of which became a staple in Alexander's diet. The roofs of his huts were thatched with long grass that grows on some of the hills. One he would use as a kitchen and the other as his bedroom. So, what would you do if you were stuck alone on a deserted island? Alexander turned to the Bible. He would read it, and read it again, and again, and again. Any time not spent going up and down the beach collecting shellfish and foraging in the bushes near his hut, he would spend in prayer and study. And through this, he was able to recover his peace of mind. He would slowly build up his courage, venturing deeper into the island every time he went out. Here, he would discover an abundant variety of vegetables, among which were pumpkins, watercresses, wild oats, mallows, radishes, parsnips, turnips, parsley, lettuces, carrots, plums, and apricots. Not every plant in this list is native to the island, as some of these had been introduced to the island by previous explorers. What had also been introduced by previous explorers was goats, of which Alexander stumbled upon a small population of. In his spare time, Alexander would chase after them. At first it was difficult to catch them, but after constant practice and exercise, he would eventually get fast enough and strong enough to catch his first goat. Rather than kill them, he would wrestle the goats, mark them by making a cut in its ear, and then let it go. This became a game which he took quite seriously. One goat he would chase up a mountain where he would catch it, but unfortunately whilst wrestling the goat, he slipped as the soil on that part of the island was very loose. Trying to catch himself on a tree, the tree would break off, and Alexander, together with the goat, would fall down to the bottom of the hill. Alexander was forced to crawl back to his hut where he would remain crippled for at least 2 weeks. As he was recovering from his injuries, Alexander would go on to domesticate the goats, who became increasingly habituated, and they would provide him with a source of milk, hide, and meat. These goats would take up a lot of Alexander's time. He spent much time talking with and singing to the goats, as well as teaching them to dance. He would soon make more animal friends, as he had a major rat issue in his hut. These rats would bite at his feet during the night and steal his food. To ward off rats, Alexander made friends with some of the feral cats that could be found on the island. The cats would protect him from the rats and be another companion to take part in his plays that he was orchestrating. The cats he adopted would multiply so quickly that after a few years, he was completely surrounded by felines. And this is essentially how he spent his days on the island. Other activities included carving his name into every tree, and he ventured more often into the interior. He would realize that the loud rumbles that he heard every now and then was due to rocks falling down the mountains, the sound of which echoed through the steep valleys of the island. Now among his companions, and in solitude, Alexander found a sense of peace through the study of scripture. This peace would be broken when the island was visited on 2 occasions by Spanish sailors, as Spain and Britain were still at war at this time, and British people found in the South Seas were executed or put in prison for life. This was a Spanish mandate, as knowledge of the area was one of Spain's most important secrets. Both times he would hide, being spotted one of the times, and chased as Alexander fled and hid in the interior of the island by climbing up a tree. Supposedly, the Spanish soldiers walked right under him, one soldier even urinating against the very tree that Alexander was concealed in. It would take 4 years and 4 months until Alexander was finally sighted by a British ship, the Duke, captained by privateer Woodes Rogers. It was February of 1709 when Alexander was brought on board. Alexander had been so isolated he had some issues speaking, as he had trouble finishing his sentences. He was completely barefoot, as he had never bothered making new shoes once his original pair had broken, and he was completely clothed in custom-made clothing from goat hide, including short breeches, a jacket, and a cap. He also had a very long beard, as never in the last 4 years had he shaved it. Alexander was a completely different person coming off the island than when he had arrived. A rash, quarrelsome man, confined to a small island with nothing but his own mind, his animal friends, and the Bible, had redeemed him. Now, being a changed person, he went straight back to being a buccaneering privateer, though in fairness, with a radically changed disposition. His story would inspire many works of fiction, most notably the Daniel Defoe novel, The Life and Surprising Adventures of Robinson Crusoe, which features a character named Robinson Crusoe, marooned on an island just as Alexander had. This novel became so well known that the Chilean government renamed the island in 1966 to Robinson Crusoe Island, hoping to boost tourism based on the famous novel. However, the tourism industry never really took off. Perhaps for the better. Let the modern world chase noise and novelty. Robinson Crusoe Island will keep its silence, and the memory of a man who found peace among goats, wind, and prayer.